Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the gaming podcast where we take a deep dive into gamer culture and everything in its orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim. Let's get into it. Today we're joined by a special guest. You know them, you love them. It's Jeremy.
Yay! Oh my gosh, it's so good to be here. It's been an exciting listen as I've gone through your past episodes, and I'm honored to be invited.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for being here. Because we mentioned you on a previous episode where we were talking about Tim being fed at that, was it Claw? It was Claw, right?
Yeah. The listeners may not know, but I've had the pleasure of being fed by Jeremy personally, and he's probably the most experienced and capable feeder I have met thus far. And we had a great time, although we did get a quart of melted ice cream all over the hotel room by accident. But, it was still a great time.
It's collateral damage. And, it is a messy business. And so when you're setting up scenes, and I don't think that we're going to get too far into this today, but make sure that you do the proper prep work so that you save yourself some trouble on the back end. But the last time I had a guy over, made sure and laid towels down all around the space. I had a chair that was easy to wipe off, all the appropriate things.
I mean, to put it out there, because Tim's spoken to me a little bit about you, and then obviously you and I have connected. I was so interested to get to know you because you had been kind of built up as this person who has that experience, and then just by virtue of being yourself, those moments rattle off the tongue, that knowledge and preparation. So for listeners, if you ever have the opportunity to get to know Jeremy in person or even online, reach out to him, because a wellspring of knowledge and truly one of those people who I could listen to you speak for hours, which is why we are going to have such a great time today having you on. Tim, what's the theme of today's episode?
Today we're talking about something that I like to call coming out of the pantry. Essentially, it is coming out as a gainer, admitting it to yourself, possibly admitting it to your social circle, maybe admitting it to your family. Personally, I don't, but some people, they're totally out there. They let everybody know what's going on. So that's a topic.
Well, maybe that's a good question to start off with, actually, how we all define it. Jeremy, as our guest, start us off. How do you define coming out of the pantry? What does that look like to you?
I guess I can only just say it and frame it in my own personal journey because I've listened, and I encourage, if you're listening for the first time today, to go back through and to listen to some of the former episodes of the podcast, because I think it does a really great job of framing today's conversation, because it's just like coming out as gay. But then you have this additional layer, additional part of yourself. And if you're like me, then this is an important part of your sexuality. And I knew that from an early age. And so I think there's some really great references to cartoons and to things that you experience as a young person before you even are aware of your sexuality that give you an indication that this is how my brain's wired. And so I was one of those really fortunate, lucky gay youths that had my first sexual experience with a gainer. And it's someone that I had met online. And so that kind of set me off, but I had so much shame. And I appreciated hearing other people share their past about how the first time they were with other people like us, that nobody said anything because nobody's ever talked about this out loud at that point, right? And so, but having that experience at 17, and then being in that relationship through my mid-20s, it really helped hone my skills and to give me real life firsthand experience. And then I was in this position after we went our separate ways, where I just had this really dark secret, and I wasn't able to have many experiences with people. But then at one point in my life, I opened up, and in fact, I was being encouraged to run for a leather contest. And they were saying, come and compete. We think you'd be great. You're, of course, always here in the leather spaces and the kink spaces. And I'd never told anybody about this outside of our community. And they said, but one thing you've got to consider is during interview, the judges are going to ask how do you fit into the kink scene? And I told him, I've got my part. Don't worry about me. When it comes time, I'll talk about this. And I didn't end up competing, but I ended up coming out to to my good friends and telling them about what my fetish and my kinks were. And they were just enamored. They said, you've got to talk about this at this state leather competition during our Kink University or Kink U series. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to. But then what I neglected to realize was that my face and my name and my class description were going to be shared on Instagram, on Facebook. And I was a former president of our Pride board here. I mean, I've done a lot of different things in the community. So I'm a very visible person. I've worked for large LGBTQ plus related nonprofit organizations in leadership positions. And so I was scared. But then when I did it for the first time and I stood on that stage full of people who were not related to our community, it was so empowering for me, because after it was over, people did not judge me. People were inquisitive. They laughed a little bit at certain parts because I like to interject a little humor here and there. But I mean, I think that, just trying to make it digestible. And then also one of the things that I've also learned, and I think that this is true with Tim and I's experience as he's taught the class with me in later sessions, is that there's a lot of crossovers. There's a lot of ways to make this relatable to what is happening in the broader scene.
We live in a society that is obsessed with health and is constantly promoting a body image that is manufactured. What kind of psychological effects do you think that has on a person who's into gaining?
So I think that one of the things you have to think about is how much do you value what you want personally, and what are you willing to sacrifice in kind of the eyes of other people, right? And so I think that is part of hesitance to meet up is, can I control this, first of all? And so how many times have we seen people who have been kind of lurkers in the scene, but then they actually gain a little bit of weight? And they're kind of intimidated by how much they enjoy it. And then what does this mean for my life? And what is my family going to say? I mean, I think that that's one of the biggest things. The family and friend comments seem to derail a lot of people. And then if they try to balance what is turning them on versus what their own projection of who they are is out to society. And so, that's really a lot to reconcile. And so, I think that that's why within our community, it is so important to make this a dialogue, and that you have to be able to understand. There've been so many good points on so many episodes up until now about consent and about, how we envision our fat bodies and how we envision the fat bodies of the people that we're trying to encourage. And that you don't order that out of a catalog. This is not JCPenney. You don't just get to choose what you're going to look like. And so there's any, right, Jesus, right? But then
expectations has to be the phrase or the two words I come back to so often, because when you engage in a culture that is almost entirely based in fantasy, because as you say, how many people have never met up with someone in real life for these things? When your entire lived experience is fantasy, of course there's a shortage of understanding when it comes to the reality of a situation. So as you say, there's all of those important points, and it kind of makes me want to ask, because you've come out of the pantry to quite a few people, I understand. Have you experienced any hardships with people from having done that?
I guess it's really for me, I think that I've been privileged because I have not had negative experiences. And I knew that we were going to kind of touch on that. I was really trying to rack my brain about anything that I could put my finger on. And it's really been overwhelmingly positive. And so it's one of those things, and I don't know if I call them kind of a case of the Sundays, whenever you have work the next day and you're laying in bed Sunday night after a long weekend, and then your mind is just kind of racing with all of these things. And it's like, getting a little bit anxious about the week. And that's kind of but then the week happens and nothing terrible happened. You know what I mean? And then it's like, why was I feeling all anxious and worked up about this? And I think that it's been the same for my experience coming out to people. I talk to, and when we talk about coming out, it's not just people knowing that I like bigger guys, or even that I like to encourage guys to gain weight. Part of teaching in the kink youth scene is I'm trying to show people what we do. And also in hopes that if there is somebody who is an undercover, or, someone who's in the pantry out there, that they don't have some of these terrible experiences that you hear people share all the time. And, like for instance, and just being very upfront, fat is attached to someone's body. You don't get to touch it and handle it however you want to.
It's not fucking Play-Doh. It's
no.
And I'll say it again for the people in the back. It's not fucking Play-Doh. Also, you've just fed me something possibly delicious. Regardless, I'm full of food. For the love of Christ, do not rough handle my body unless you also have a fetish for me puking all over you, because that will definitely happen. And I'm going to put it out there for anyone who's curious. Personally, not my thing, not consenting to that. Please.
Yeah, me neither.
I don't know. There just seems like a very, very detached, like they don't even project it onto themselves, for goodness sake. They don't even think, gosh, would I like this if I was fat? They just kind of go, my dick's hard. And, a Warren Davis story once told me that if I force feed him 12 pizzas, he'll be the size of a balloon. So I'll just
I've had some experiences where people have been very rough with me after, like, meeting up with more inexperienced feeders, and, actually me having to feed myself, which I mean, that's one of the things that I loved the most about meeting up with Jeremy is he actually hand fed me. I mean, it's actually kind of hard to find feeders that'll do that, but with more inexperienced ones, I'm feeding myself basically. And there, like, this one guy was just fucking rough handling me so hard, like almost to the point where I was afraid he was going to bruise me. And I'm like, you got to calm it down, dude. Like, I'm not a chew toy. Like,
well, and I think that's one of the things too, is that you have to know too. And I feel like that there's all kinds of different relatable, and one of the things, even if they're not gainer and encourager related kink use that happen in your area, there are likely opportunities for you to attend fetish and kink classes. And regardless of the topic, a lot of the concepts spill over. And so, and then you'll also identify ways that we have crossover kinks when we talk about power exchange, when we talk about humiliation, when you talk about rope play, there's all kinds of different things, but then there are similar, key characteristics or key components of having a successful sex scene, or even if it's a non-sexual, but even a feeding scene, where the kinds of conversations and the respect that you show to people, even in a submissive and dominant kind of role play or a scenario, that kind of transcends everything. And then also, I think, as an encourager to all the encouragers out there, is if you want somebody to successfully eat a lot, and if that's the goal of the scene that you're in, you need to be flexible, because this is not your sole fantasy, right? And so, like Tim was saying, yes, I hand fed him. Do I get off on hand feeding? I don't sit at home and, pleasure myself thinking about hand feeding people, but I do know that that's part of the scene. Another thing I've done during the class is roaming hog. Was demonstrator in one of the classes, and I laid down a trash bag on stage and put a sheet cake down there and just let him face plant in it and go full pig mode in front of a big room full of people. I don't necessarily, that doesn't do anything for me necessarily, but that is part of a scene that helps to set the stage for everything. And so, I think that it's having an understanding of the concepts, and then understanding what people's limitations are and where you need to draw lines, because sometimes when people are in that, for those who are wired that way, when they're in that really piggish mode, they want to consume more than they're capable of handling. And so then also being able to control the dynamic and scale it back when it's appropriate to do that. And so I think that it just is having a good open line of communication with people that you're sharing space with, because at the end of the day, if you're a sexual person, and you're going to be intimate with them, then it's going to make it all that much better when you are having respect for each other within your different roles that you play.
No, I totally get that. And it kind of makes me want to ask, because you touched on limit for a moment there, do you think there's like a limit to, do you think there's a limit to what you should tell people when it comes to coming out of the pantry, or a limit to the number of people or the types of people that you talk to when it comes to coming out of the pantry?
I think that it depends on how concerned you are about how people perceive you, and so if you really do a really strong job of projecting who you are as a person, and you feel comfortable enough to be able to accept people being critical of what your lifestyle might be. Particularly for me, I have encourager privilege. I think that there's a lot of encourager privilege out there because I'm not the one who's physically changing my body, right? And so how do you feel about people that are going to think and throw up all the arguments that friends and family always do about being negative about gaming? And are you comfortable dealing with that? I think that if we had a more established community, that it would be easier for us. But then again, I think that could be true about any kink that we have in this. You have people who are into scat. You have people who are into blood play. You have people who do all kinds of things that are violating societal norms. And they also come under criticism. And so I think that don't yuck my yum is something that should apply to everybody. But there's always going to be a possibility that that's not going to be the case. And so I think that it just depends. I think people who live out loud help to open doors, but then they're also going to catch some fire sometimes for that. And so it takes all kinds. And I think that anytime, though, that we represent, and one of the things that's been so discouraging for me is that, particularly here where I live, I've never had somebody from the Grommr, the gainer community, show up for one of my classes, even though I message broadly and post a lot about it. That fear about being identified as one of us, I think, is so strong that it keeps people from being able to experience the warmth of the sunlight.
I've talked before about that sort of invisible audience that I feel like a lot of us suffer from. This idea that if we are identified publicly as a member of this community, it's like suddenly there's going to be a giant arrow over your house that says fat person lives here. This person is trying to gain weight on purpose. And like, that was something that was hard for me to get over too. And just within the last couple of months of going back into the bar scene, going to the leather bar for gear nights and having, because it's summer, it's hot, shirts off, bellies hanging out, and no one's saying anything. All this fear that I had built up in my mind all these years that, people are going to start saying, wow, you're really getting fat, aren't you? No one said shit because they don't care. We've got to get, I feel like there's so many of us that have to get past this idea that people care what we're doing, because they don't.
Tim, you've had these moments where you try to balance leather and your sense of self. I mean, in terms of your own journey of openness with the people that you're open to, what has the response been like from people?
Well, I've been kind of selective thus far. I've been kind of careful. Like, my kinky friends know because they're kinky, and they tend to not be judgmental because they're used to being judged for their individual kinks. So they're usually more open-minded. It's very much like a sort of, oh, okay, that's cool. And then the topic changes. As far as like civilian friends, I kind of pick my battles. I'm like, are they going to get it? Are they not going to get it? Do they care? Like, family, no. I just don't want to hear it. Family don't know. And, I know some gainers that are out to their families, and that's fine. And I'm not going to ever knock that. It's just that for me personally, I don't see a reason to tell them. It's like, this is my private sexual romantic life. They really don't need to know that. Of course, they're seeing that I'm putting on weight. And it's funny because only now are they starting to say something. And it's just one sister that's saying something. My mom just keeps going, well, you're like your father. It's going to happen whether you like it or not. And the other sister doesn't care. But the youngest one, who's a little bit more into appearances, she's like, you sitting down a lot at work recently? You've been having more of a desk situation going on? What's up with that?
Yeah, I love that because my family are just cunts. I remember my first Christmas here we were doing like an Aussie orphan Christmas, where a whole bunch of us who didn't have anywhere else to go, we all went around someone's house, brought bits, had a good fucking time. And obviously, because of the time difference, you know, we were all ducking in and out of bedrooms and bathrooms and kitchens just to have a snatch of a phone call because it's nighttime over there and we're all having a morning snack, blah, 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 blah. And I've got 4 siblings and one parent I give a shit about. So, you know, I'm trying to talk to everyone and blah, 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 blah. And it's my older sister. And you get on the camera phone, and in the middle of me opening with Merry Christmas, she goes, "Fuck, you've gotten fat." And I've gone, "Thanks, Rick. Good to see you too. Are you having a good day?" She's like, "Yeah, nah, it's been a good day. Look, let me get Josh. You can wish him a Merry Christmas too." I thought, okay, cool, fine, fuck, whatever. And because my sister's had a child now, that officially makes her an older woman because she's forgotten how phones work because she didn't put herself on fucking mute. And I heard her say to her partner, "See, he's fucking fatter. I told you he would be." And I'm like, what is this? But that's different strokes for different folks. And there is a reason she lives international away from certain scenarios that puts one in frustratingly difficult positions to gain weight. But that's my situation, and that's all there is to it, unfortunately.
I think family's always going to be hard.
Yeah.
You know, and it's also, you know, some people get turned on by their friends making comments, right? But you're not necessarily turned on by your family making comments. You know, it's a different thing.
Yeah, something like my sister just doesn't turn me on for some reason. You know, it's not quite what my fetishes align with personally. Yeah.
I don't think that would be the case for anybody. And, you know, as far as like, you know, even though I probably am a little bit more out about it, just broader community wise, it's not like you walk into a community space. I don't walk into the gay bar and I'm like, you know, "I'm into bellies, everybody. Hey." But, you know, I think it's more of just as people know you and as you're in those spaces and they see the kind of guys you spend time with. And then, you know, and just, I've had so many fulfilling experiences though with my civilian quote unquote friends. And we were just talking about this because during the Rolling Lives, some of my civilian friends and I were out and James invited me to hop on and they were with me. And I said, "Do we want to interview some civilians?" And we did. And there was somebody on the patio who kind of overheard our conversation and was talking about how, you know, they wish they could be more body positive, but they gained weight. And then my civilian friends and I cut up a bar shirt and made a crop top for them. And then they were playing with his belly. And I mean, it was just, you know, spreading the good news. And then after learning about this podcast, my civilian friend is addicted to the podcast, is talking to people at work about it, is talking to other civilian queers that, you know, this exists in a very positive light. And I mean, I think that's all very, very good. It's a very good direction for us to be heading into.
I think so. And a little shout out to Evan. Love you, buddy. I know we haven't had a chance to talk too much, but let's talk more. You're a really cool guy.
Not only is he cool, he is such a handsome man too. I mean, he's very traditionally handsome.
It was late at night here and you had the audacity to bring on 2 very attractive gentlemen onto my live. And then of course everyone's going, "James, why are you hitting on these men, asking if they're single, asking for phone numbers?" And they were like, "We're dating each other." And I was like, "I'm not bothered." Did I start a bitch? You both pretty.
Well, you know, I think that also, the perception with them being slim and muscular and handsome is that they would be judgmental about this, right? And oh yeah,
it's a holdover. It's a holdover from those old insecurities, man. Because even now, when I am followed on Instagram by someone that I would consider classically handsome, you know, chiseled and model-esque, and looks like they could appear in a fashion ad, and they want me, it's like, huh? Like, you want that?
What?
Like, what? I'm fascinated by that. I don't, you know, because I don't know. I guess there's, in my brain, I sort of divide like what I typically see as an encourager, because some of the encouragers that I've met up with over the years, they tended to be similar looking, like really skinny, kind of geeky, kind of nerdy. I mean, I know I'm painting with a large brush here, but like the ones that I've met in this city have been like that. So then to then have an encourager or admirer, belly enthusiast who looks, you know, like I was talking about, like, and they want me, it's just like, are you sure, sir? Like,
one of the things that I do have to say is, like, one of the additional benefits, even just beyond having friends that are supportive of you, is that you have scenarios, or at least I have in my experience, where people who are not associated with our community as they go through life, you know, their body changes. Everybody, I think, unintentionally gains some weight, you know, and then they lose some weight. When people who know me are thicker than they normally would be. One of our former state title holders, after things started opening back up after the pandemic, was thicker than I'd ever seen him. And we had not seen each other in person. And he walks out on the patio of this gay bar, sees me over there, grabs his belly and starts shaking it as he walks towards me. And he's like, look at this. Like, you know, and then other times, you know, people being drunk and silly, running up to my car window and lifting their shirt up and pressing their belly against the window of my car. You know,
where is that for me? Why isn't that happening to me?
Yeah, not to be clout chasers here, but we do run, you know, a relatively successful gaming community podcast. Where are the bellies? Where are the bellies being handed to me by beautiful chubby men? I want them. I want them now.
I'm still getting more unsolicited dick pics than unsolicited belly pics. I don't understand it.
Oh, God.
I think I was at the height of my privilege during that very long live stream that we did from the hot tub that one night, where I just had Roaming Hog's belly sitting on top of my head.
Oh yeah, as I basically being threatened with like a snapped spine. The weight of all of that, honestly, I'm surprised you haven't formed some form of paralysis. It's truly incredible.
It's a rough life.
Oh my goodness. I do want to ask, what is some basic advice that you would give to anyone who has yet to take the leap into owning their gaining journey, coming out of the pantry to themselves?
So I think that it's important to know that it's okay for you to take whatever road that you end up taking within that journey. And so there are people who are very comfortable with the idea that I like bigger men. And you don't have to like bigger, like belly fetishism in itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with liking a guy that is 180 pounds or liking a guy that is 580 pounds. And then you can kind of, your tastes are going to grow and change, and you're going to, you know, maybe you are an encourager that decides that then you want to gain. And then maybe you get into it and you're fine after you gain 20 pounds. And you don't have to live up to the fantasy of everybody else that we share this space with. Yeah. And so I think that being really comfortable with the idea of how I wake up and what I'm into today is fine, but then also being true about representing that. And so we've talked about this in just some regular live streams before about being disingenuous. And so I think that if you're going to consider just for yourself, spend some time reflecting on what is it about this that actually turns me on, and how much of my life do I want this to be a part of, and all of that kind of stuff. I think that being really sure-footed in those respects will help you maneuver should this happen. And I, you know, particularly, I always had a big fear of being outed. And I know that was discussed before too, about weaponizing. So you come out and somebody weaponizes this against you. Well, for me, I don't have to worry about it being weaponized against me because I've already taken that power, and I like that feeling. And so there's nothing, and unfortunately, we talked about the stories, right? I was that dumb 15-year-old that printed off a story and I stuck it under my mattress. And guess who finds things under mattresses?
Parents.
Yep.
Parents. So it wasn't even like photograph. It wasn't even, you know, like something that you could explain away. It was called South Beach Bellies, and it was on GainerWeb.
The documented story of the situation.
So, I mean, so that that water under the bridge there, we don't discuss it. But, you know, my first partner did gain 125 pounds while we were together. And so, I mean, it was pretty straightforward. But I do have to say, though, that I got called on the carpet by their mother. And we had never explicitly talked to her about things, but she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "This is inappropriate, because this is a conversation for you if you feel like you have to have with your son, and I'm not talking to you about this."
There's something to be said about how well known the concept of gaining is in the wider world, right? And I think a lot of people would prefer it if things were open. Some people would prefer it if things remained closed. And I think sometimes we underestimate how much the world outside of us actually knows about us and what the sort of world stage perspective of gaining is. My question for you, should we strive for acknowledgement, or is it a bit too soon for that?
I think that it would be helpful for us to understand that when we are brave,
Yeah,
that our bravery means that hopefully young people don't have the kinds of shame and the kinds of negative experiences that we have all had because nobody took that step, right? And so that doesn't mean that I have to hook a guy up to a funnel in front of, 10,000 people at Pride, and do the kinkier, really extreme parts of what we're into. But I think that it's important for people, and this is regardless of age, because there are people who are 50 and 60 years old who feel the same way about this, right? And so, but to know that there's a space where you can come in, and particularly, I've used to feel like that there was more of a brotherhood of us when we had those chat room experiences. And so when there were spaces like that, and I think that you see this coming with Instagram Live, and I appreciated the comments about a new site. And what a new site might represent, and having video be more a part of that and all of that. But I think that people need to be able to come in and just have banter and have a fun experience, but then also to ask legitimate questions and for it to be more interactive. And I really, really feel strongly that having some of that interaction be in person is helpful. And so, but once the cat is out of the bag, you don't get to control what direction it goes. And so you're going to have people who are going to be exhibitionists about things, who want to really show off. And that's going to be a source of stimulation for them. And measuring all of that, it's the same as any other. I think that we just have to stop seeing ourselves as being different, because the people that like to get shit on do all kinds of things to each other out in public. And, the guy that teaches, one of the guy that teaches the scat classes walks around with a big poo emoji hat on, up in the bar and everything. I mean, it's just like,
it's so funny, like, because I was thinking about, while you were saying all that, I was thinking about the first time that I ever posted a face pic on Grommr, the first time I ever posted a face pic on Instagram, the first time I ever posted a face pic on Twitter. It's like I had been kind of just the headless torso for so long. And I thought, no, if I post a picture of my face, then it's all over. Someone's going to see it. They're going to take it and run with it. I'm going to find it on Facebook somehow. Because you kind of see these horror stories about some gainers, like especially the ones that were popular on Tumblr, people hacking into their personal Facebook accounts and then posting like personal pictures on like these tribute Tumblrs. And it's just such a huge deal to finally put my face out there. And the last sort of frontier for me was Twitter, because I was like, now, once I put my face out there, I can't control what's going to get retweeted. It could wind up anywhere. Twitter is the one that you have the least amount of control over. But I said, why am I doing this? why am I afraid of this? What, like, who's going to see it? Am I afraid the FBI is going to break down my door and, you know, cart me away? Like, why? What does any of this matter? And a lot of people, you know, they come up with, well, I've got a job that I can't let people know that I'm into this. And I can respect that. Like, I'm not going to, you know, shit on that. But it's like, I'm a nurse, you know, so if at any point in my career, if a manager pulls me into their office and like pulls up something of me that they found on Twitter and goes, what's all this about? I'll be like, it's none of your business. And it has no impact on how I do my job. So unless you would like to talk to the union rep about this, see you later, you know?
You know, something that a friend of mine once did in a job because she used to do sex work. And she made a point of looking up the private accounts of her managers so that when that inevitable moment happens of like a porn vid going around in a place of business and the manager wants to pull her aside and say, we have to let you go, she's got their tits out on their phone going, if you expose me, I will expose you. Oh, you don't think what I'm threatening you with is appropriate? Why do you think what you are threatening me with is appropriate?
That is ballsy. I don't know if I'd have the balls to blackmail my boss back.
Honestly,
when we have to be clear about one thing though, that there's a false equivalence here, because most of our community, particularly, and this is a whole nother topic, if you ever want to have me back, we can talk about how vanilla the broader community is sometimes because of the restrictions that our only limited platforms allow us to have. But but that being into what we're into and having your shirt off and posting a picture of you without your shirt on and after you've gained 5 or 10 pounds is not the same as being naked and being it is our shame that makes us feel that way. And that's another thing too, is I think is very funny, because you have people who intentionally want to be fatter and they intentionally gain weight, but then they have shame about their fat body. And I find that very interesting. When the weight gain was intentional,
they become the sad fats that everyone sees on the news, and they go, well, don't you want to lose weight now? And there's this weird, I don't know. I sometimes think to myself, some people are very much blessed with a metabolism that allows them to gain very, very quickly. And obviously we love to see it. We stan it. It looks fantastic. But how many of them turn around and go, this happened way too quickly and I was not prepared, either physically or mentally, for the ramifications of this? I am not prepared and I have been spooked. I've been turned off by this and I am feeling all kinds of things. Because we also don't encourage people to take a breather, to take a process. We go, oh, you gained 100 pounds this year? Let's go for 150 next year. Oh, like you got diabetes? That's fine. Just, inject the insulin while you eat the sugar. You'll trick your body. It'll never even know. Like, people do that. And it's so damaging.
And check in on your fat gainer friends, because the thing is that for so many people, particularly, there's all kinds of different motivators, right? And so you can wake up and, even though the ultimate desire is there, you can wake up feeling badly about yourself, just like anybody else. Yeah. And so I think that it's important to, have that understanding. And of course, I like to talk about separating the scene from the lifestyle, right? Because it really is a lifestyle. And you can have a very hot scene, you can do role play, you can set boundaries and all that kind of stuff. But you have to wake up and live every day. And so it's going to be this thing where, people are going to want to go up and down. And our community has so little tolerance for folks changing their position, right? And saying, I'd like to lose some weight. And then the criticism and it runs the whole gamut.
I've made this comment before. I define gaining less of gaining weight and more gaining perspective, gaining proximity to the body of your choice. Because weight gain is valid. Weight loss is valid. Weight maintenance is valid. Changing fat to muscle and muscle to fat is valid. And if we start to gatekeep someone's right and ability to change their body how they want, it defeats the whole purpose. But I kind of want to speak to that a bit. We have a listener question. There's been a bit of commentary about exhibitionism. Do you think exhibitionism is the antithesis to staying in the pantry?
I don't know. I think that it can be.
Yeah.
I've definitely been, and I have shared so many great experiences. I think it would be interesting to have some folks with a lot of lived experience do like top 10 hottest, encounters or something sometime. But, I feel like I really am, being so open. I mean, I feel like my life is the antithesis to it, but then I think without context, exhibitionism can be all kinds of different things. I've been uncomfortable with how some guys have acted in public with their display of that piggish behavior and of, having a meetup where they have been very messy or, been in public spaces. And, I think that there is, while that's great on stage while we're doing education about what the things our people do in the middle of Target, I don't know if that's, but then again, as I reflect on it, it was super hot. And so I think that it's hard to kind of put a sign, a spectrum to it. You know what I mean? Like I think it is.
Say 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Be careful what you wish for. As the Pussycat Doll said, be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it.
And we're talking as well about different forums where people engage in. I think people of my generation, especially and younger, have really latched on to more open forms of social media like Twitter and Instagram and even TikTok now. Gainers have this opportunity to be seen publicly on a level like never before. Do you think something like that is going to ease the gainer lifestyle into the public eye in a positive way?
I don't think that you can go much lower than where we're at.
Very true.
And so, I had messaged, I forget who I messaged. I think it was you, James, because I had been so critical of our online platform. And then I got this message. And it was from a person that's a little, I guess, I don't know. I thought that they must have thought that I knew them or something. But then they were like, my name is so-and-so from Grommr. And I thought, oh God, the Grommr police have found me. I am going to be taken in for an inquisition and hauled in front of the fat court and kicked out. But, no, I do feel like that we have a lot of, there's a big conversation about the monetization of our community and what we pay for and how we pay for it and what the benefit of that is. And then what's the benefit? Because all of the content that you pay for on some platforms is given for free and you get nothing back from the additional things that people pay for. And so who's enriching themselves with that? And what benefit is it doing us? Or what benefit is it doing our broader community? When we have all of these other just broader issues that impact us outside of people getting fat, when there are major societal things that need to happen, how much money is being made here and what, generally speaking, in the broader gay community, there's an expectation of participation in supporting important charities and all that kind of stuff. You don't ever hear that being a part of what's going on in our spaces. And so I think that, with becoming part of the broader community, I think that there's all kinds of different conversations like that to be had too.
I think that's great. Tim, again, someone who's a part of multiple communities, what's your take on that? Like, what kind of things do you think the gainer community need to start to integrate that they could learn from other communities?
Well, like Jeremy was saying about how it's just become a very self-serving space now, especially because damn near every gainer is jumping on the OnlyFans Patreon train. And like he was saying, nothing's being given back. Like when I think about being in the leather community, as much as it is as self-indulgent as any other community, they do fundraising, they do charity drives, they do things to try to give back. Claw, the very event where Jeremy and I met, gives back. It's a nonprofit. They raise over $100,000 and they distribute it through many charities. Like, I don't think I've ever heard any Gainer event being linked to some kind of charity event, or even a Gainer saying, hey, this Christmas, why don't we consider those who are less fortunate than us, and like even link to a charity, on their page or something. I think we kind of have to stop being so self-involved and selfish. I mean, and that sounds ironic because you'd think that like gaining is sort of the ultimate selfish fetish because you're changing your own body and you're overindulging. The whole thing is about excess and gluttony. But that pathway is going to lead to self-destruction at some point. Like, you have to start considering giving back, which is one of the big reasons why you and I started with this podcast, because both of us wanted to give something back to the community.
And that's why we were doing lives beforehand. That's why we do, intentional community-focused lives now, and why that's now, we trialed it once just to see what would happen. Bitch, the response, people who were like, I'm so sad that I missed this. I've watched all 4 hours of this because every moment was incredible to hear what people had to say. It's very clear that there is a desire and a hunger for what we are doing. And so if anything, it's indicative that we just need to do more of it. And the hope might very well be that if Thicc Radio can grow, ironically, to the point where we have enough excess that maybe we can become a charity supporter. We can become one of those stalwarts who says, these are the people that we need to start giving to. These can be the patrons that we put our focus into.
Well, and with what Tim was saying about the leather community too, our gaining community it's like stunted growth, because there are other things like, how about being status neutral? When do we have conversations around people living with HIV? And what, the leather community does such a fantastic job of promoting PrEP, of promoting the concept of undetectable equals untransmittable, of all of those things that help reduce stigma and across our broader society. We do none of that. I see none of that in the gaining community. We have major issues with how people of color are treated in the gaining community. And we have, which is a constant conversation in leather scenes and spaces that you see none of happening. It's all of this vapid, I feel fat tonight, I'm hungry, who wants to feed me, which is all fine. But there's no depth there. And so for people, like me, I want to have a full and vibrant conversation where we can talk about how fat you want to get, but then we also talk about all of the other things that are important in life, and just to really have that full cultural experience that we share in all of our traditional spaces with people.
100%. And look, we've got one last question here, and I want to ask you, what does the future of openness in the gainer community look like to you?
I think that it looks like people not having to hide in the dark shadows and stumble around trying to find out what they want, and find people that are well adjusted and that they can find community with, and instead having it be just like so many other things are, where it's out in the open. And of course, you're always going to have people that are not wholesome, that are not positive parts of that. But at least it's a coalesced thing that you can participate in real life with.
Yeah. Tim, what about you? What are your thoughts?
It's like Jeremy was saying, I really want there to be a point where, because when I think back to being that 18-year-old person discovering this world and thinking, well, I mean, I was glad to find out I wasn't alone, but it was also kind of disheartening to be like, am I ever going to meet anybody else? Like, it just seems so small. Like, am I ever going to be able to truly be open about this? Am I ever going to be able to tell anyone? And I don't want that to happen. And as someone who was entrenched in a very toxic gay bar culture life for so many years, and just dealing with all the negativity and like the mean girl shit that happened during those years, it's like, I would have loved if someone at some point would have come along and said, look, babe, I know you don't fit in here. This isn't the kind of people you want to be around. Come play with the fat boys. Like, it's going to be cool. It's going to be open. No one's going to judge you. Everything's, just come over here, be with us, be who you want to be. It's all going to be fine. Don't give a flying fuck what the, ice blonde, rail thin Twinkie boy is saying to you, because it's not going to last. So, like, that's what I want to see. I want to see people being able to be open and free and liberated. Because James, you and I were talking just a couple of days ago about how, like, people think that the gay community is sex obsessed, but I always say we're sex liberated. Like, that's what I want. I want the gayners to be sexually liberated as well. Like, no more shame and hiding. Like,
you don't just share space with people that you want to have sex with. And yeah, and indeed, and you can't. So there are, and I'm bad about this. I can be flippant and make off the cuff remarks in being funny, where I've said sometimes it feels like the land of the misfit toys, right? And so, and then when you do public open meetups that are advertised for anybody who wants to come, unfortunately, there are times when there are people who show up who don't know how to be productive parts of that space. Right. And the thing is, though, that, think about the kind of person that you want to be. And do you just want to kick them to the curb because the first time that they show up and that they have all of these questions and everything else that, they don't measure up, or they weren't funny, or they didn't say much, or they said the wrong thing? I think that we've got to put some effort in to get something out. And so all of those things, filtering all of those things out is a big part of growing up. And we have a lot of growing up to do.
James and I talked about, like, mentoring and how it really doesn't happen, and even aside from, like, gaining, I'm at a point in my life, I'm about to be 38, and I feel like, having existed in gay USA for so long, it's like, I want to take some of these younger, not necessarily just Twinkie, but I'm talking about just younger gay guys who just are like the clueless one that I was. And I don't want to mold them, but I want to give them opportunity and be like, I'd like to teach them a little bit of culture, teach them where it all came from. Like, because even I'm not as good on my gay history as I should be, but, I know something. And it's like, you have to understand the past to, realize how we got here today. Same thing with gaining. Yeah. We have a rich past, all the way from pamphlets that used to be distributed to apps that are on our iPhones. So, like, I would love to be able to do that. It's just, it's sometimes it's hard because, like, we talk about how people feel afraid to reach out to each other, or people feel afraid to meet up. I mean, I've gotten plenty of DMs and messages and stuff like that, but actually getting someone to physically meet me in person, that's been hard. And I'd like to see that change.
You and I are the same age. And so I'll be 38 later this year. And one of the things I was thinking about too, leading up to this podcast, is that, and I appreciate followers that I have, and I appreciate the interaction, and I don't feel like I'm being relegated or put into the retirement home just yet. But I understand that my influence will continue to wane as I get older. And so, what does this look like for who's going to carry the torch, and who's going to, hopefully we create a space where some of the young folks, continue and pass that information on, because I think that, my beard is not getting any more pepper. It's only salt from here. So
same here.
Right. But we're going to hang on.
You're looking for me to pick up the mantle as both of you age and enter into retirement. I'll arrange your carers for you. It's fine. I'll make sure that
I have some tutoring that I can do with you.
But I'd genuinely be so down for that. I made the comment, I moved to this country to get away from family and be more free with my gaining. But it's also to connect with gainers just in general, because back home, there really wasn't much of that going on. And I thought, fuck it, why not come here? And isn't it funny that, like, the first person who said to me, oh, a bit of mentoring or a bit of teaching or a bit of whatever comes from a person in yet another country who I've only just now met. And it's that constant, you're looking for people, and you're always going to be looking. to clarify, very much down for that. You let me know when and where it will be it. But I don't know. I think when I think about coming out of the pantry and owning it, I think it does start from owning it in yourself. And I think that's the first step that so many of us still haven't done. And we're on these websites wondering to ourselves, why is nothing happening? But we're kind of terrified of still being found out. And that's worth exploring.
There's nothing wrong with us. And we don't owe anybody any explanations about who we are and why we are the people that we are. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to apologize for it, and we should not be ashamed of it.
I love that. And, you know, Tim, I think I said this quote to you recently. There's a Netflix series called Sex Education, which I think is phenomenal. If you haven't seen it, I'd say go watch it. There's a girl that comes in and her character gets revealed to be asexual. And she goes to speak with this parent who's the sex therapist. And it's this conversation. And the parent just very plainly says, have you ever considered that you might be asexual? And then she says, sex doesn't make you whole. So how could you ever be broken? And not many lines get me, but that got me right together. And that brought me right back to my gayness sexuality. That moment of, I am not broken for my love, obsession, addiction, sexuality, fetish, kink, whatever you want to call it, with fat and with gaining. I am not broken. I am not damaged. I am a whole functioning human being. And I owe it to myself to own that in its entirety.
I love that. And I kind of still, there are times when I still feel at a disadvantage because I still have not yet embraced my other major fetish, macrophilia. I'm still very hesitant because I almost, and it's so, I know it sounds a certain way to say it, but it's like, I almost feel like that's weirder and an even harder sell. It's like, I can explain away gainerism, but how do you explain away macrophilia? It's like, that's the one that I think Matt is literally the only person that knows that I'm into that.
Well, maybe that'll be our next podcast. It'll be welcome to Supersized Radio, the macro podcast where we talk about macrophilia and everything that it crushes.
So Tim, me being the first feeder and me being 6'5" and having you in the chair, even though it's not macrophilia, was that a component of?
Oh yeah, that's why I absolutely love guys that are that tall. Like the one guy that I've talked about on the podcast before, and the one guy I talked to James about, who was like the 7 foot tall, 500-pound guy. You know, that was almost incorporating both fetishes at once. And the only thing that ruined it was the hygiene. If that hadn't been so terrible, it would have been on like Donkey Kong, but it just got ruined, unfortunately. And I've never decided to open that door again. So, well, with that person anyway.
Well, listeners, now you know Tim's sordid secret, his macrophilia love. If there are any macrophilia lovers out there, you should very much get in touch with Tim. But ladies, I think that brings us to the end of today's podcast episode. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It was an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to listen to your future episodes, and thank you guys so much for doing the Lord's work.
Thank you. Listen, before you go, do you have anything else you want to say? And also tell us where people can find you online.
Absolutely. I'm the theapostle on Grommr. I am Neapolitan Bonaparte on Instagram. And, I just live being your truest, most authentic self every single day, and you will not regret it. And, it's almost like that just being brave. And I think that you will feel rewarded even when you encounter adversity by being true to who you are. And so I think that that's the best advice that there is to give.
I love that. But that's a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave a good review. As always, you can find me on Grommr, Instagram, and TikTok at stannnum, and Twitter and YouTube at stannnum.bsky.
And you can find me on Grommr as Orpheus. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok as Thicky Mouse. And of course, you can find more of what we've talked about today on Instagram and Patreon at Thicc Radio.
And you can also find us now on Twitter and TikTok too, also at Thicc Radio. So until next time, bye, fats.
Bye, fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by stannnum and Thicc.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Pantry.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.